Welcome to Good Thinking. Welcome, good thinkers. We have a very interesting show. I hope it's interesting show today where we are going to all be discussing how to be more comfortable with having controversial conversations. Should we even have controversial conversations? Why would we subject ourselves to controversial conversations? It's so uncomfortable. Why would we do that? Aha! That's what we're getting into today. So, welcome to the show. For those of you regular good thinkers, let everyone know who you are and where you're from. And there's a lot of participation. And we particularly like this because people are coming from all over the world, good thinkers from all over the world, that gives us each a perspective that may be a little different from our own because we all are coming from a different viewpoint. So we're coming from a different place, which, by the way, doesn't make us all have the same perspective, but it gives us a broader perspective. So welcome here for this 30-minute, give or take, session that we do each Monday at 9 a.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, LinkedIn Live and YouTube Live, where we luxuriate in metacognition. We give ourselves a little bit of time away from all the time we spend on what to think so we can improve how to think. So I'm going to say, look at who we have here. We've got Stephen from YouTube. Greetings from one of the rest stops along the Lewis and Clark Trail. Woohoo! Woohoo! And we have got Abdul from Warsaw, Poland. Welcome. And we've got Steve from Toronto in the house. And we've got good thinkers coming on from all over. So I'll try to bring your comments in as much as possible. We didn't do a lot of heads up today, or we didn't give a big lead time for today's show. Sometimes I get to it early in the week and it gets a lot more time for people to come on. And sometimes I'm running a little bit behind and I don't have an opportunity to kind of get a lot of people on because I just put it up last night. So we have got Abdurrached. Hey, how have you been? Welcome. I'm glad you're back. And Jocelyn from Phoenix and Jeffrey from Canada, from Pickering, Canada. So we've got a lot of good thinkers from all over. We're going to continue to bring your comments in. Let's start the show with asking you how to weigh in on how you feel about discussing controversial topics. And I'm going to give you three options. So you put it in the chat, and then I'm going to ask you another question, and then we'll clarify what we all mean by controversial topics. Okay, so how do you feel about discussing controversial topics? Do you feel A, excited? I love discussing controversial topics. B, I'm willing to do it, but I'd rather not. I'm willing to do it. It's not something I love, but I'm willing to do it. That's B. Or C, uncomfortable. I really don't like discussing controversial topics. So let us know what you think here. And then the second question is, how would you like to feel? So maybe you feel really excited and you'd like to feel a little less comfortable because people don't like having all these controversial conversations. How do you feel? And then the second one is, how do you want to feel? If you feel uncomfortable or willing, but you'd rather not have controversial conversations, are you okay with that? Or would you rather feel more comfortable having controversial conversations? Okay, so we've got Michael. Okay. Oh, frigid. Are you cold there? Cold in Toronto. We were cold in Portland, but now it's kind of relatively balmy and 50 degrees. We went and played pickleball yesterday, and the week before it was snowing. Barkley from DC. I think DC has had a lot of snow too. I don't know where you guys are now. And then Michael says the best discussions are on controversial topics. Wait, where are my rubber chickens? I have to agree. This is just a personal agreement. So, yay! I love having controversial conversations. However, if you don't, you don't. So Ray says C, because I struggle to be dispassionate, but I wish I could be A. Okay, that is a legitimate Ray. I love it. I love it because, the how to think means you have to be honest about it. Aha. Oh, minus 16 Celsius. I don't like that. I don't like that too cold. Unless I'm on skis, then I like it. All right. So let's start with a definition. A controversial issue is one that presents a challenge and stimulates debate. It involves no universally held or fixed point of view. Now, if you hang around with a lot of like-minded people, you could think that a controversial issue is not controversial because everyone agrees with you. But almost any issue can become controversial when people hold different beliefs, views, or values. And it's still controversial if people hold those beliefs and values, but they don't share them with you. And that's when a controversial issue becomes something else. So let's get into it. I'm going to say A. So Jocelyn says A, important and necessary for growth. Yay, I think that's great. But it's true, if you don't feel comfortable, hopefully by the end of today, you will, because what we're going to do is get some very practical ways of thinking about having controversial conversations with some tips and tricks of how you can do it. So I think you'll feel more comfortable by the end. You'll have to let me know. All right. I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. Okay. Stephen says, depends a lot on with whom I would be having the controversial conversation. Are they someone I like or respect, or are they a jerk? The latter is unlikely to be a constructive conversation. Ooh, really good point. Can you have a productive controversial conversation with someone who is a jerk? I wonder. I don't know. Best wishes from Bangladesh. Yay! And we have got regards from Dubai. So we've got really good thinkers, both from the LinkedIn Learning side and the YouTube side, because we're both streaming LinkedIn Live and YouTube Live on the show. If you want to get notifications of good thinking, because you want to be a regular good thinker, then you can go to Becky Saltzman, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and hit that bell notification, and then you will be notified. Hey, get on and join the conversation. It's Monday. Let's do this. All right. So is there anything that you would like to be better at? This is a question that you'd like to, there's a skill, some kind of way of thinking, something, anything, math, tennis, anything that you would like to be better at or more comfortable with, but you never practice. You never practice. You kind of want to be better. Is it really true that you want to be better if you never practice? Is there something that you can just wish yourself into being better without ever practicing? That is the question. I've got some good comments I want to bring in. So Abdurrachid says, it depends on how open-minded the discussion partner is. Good point. We're going to get into that and how to establish that. So that's really good. Jeffrey says, I love controversial, let's see what Jeffrey says. I love controversial conversations, though they arouse emotion, absolutely, and likely to be divisive in nature for the parties involved. They're complex, absolutely, highly emotive, although they don't have to be. But they are often emotive and not easily settled by appeal to evidence alone. As a result of this, rational discussions are rarely achieved. Yes, unfortunately, I think I agree with you. Exploring controversial issues have educational as well as personal and social benefits. The skills required to navigate contentious discourses are essential in a democratic culture for promoting the freedom of expression. Rubber chickens. I love that comment. I love that comment. And I think it really does. I'm going to take off the banner so we have more room for these great comments. Move the banner so we have more room. All right. So is there anything has anyone come up with anything you'd like to get better at, but you never practice? And by the way, that should be a little hint. Because if you think you can get better at something without ever practicing, then either you might be mischaracterizing how much you really want to get better at this thing, or you're mischaracterizing how you get better at this thing. I don't think that there is anything that we can get better at that we never, ever try or never practice. So if we want to get better at controversial conversations, how do we practice? Where do we practice? Okay, where should we have them? How should we have them? Should we have them at work? Okay. If you want to work maybe you're a manager, maybe you're an entrepreneur, maybe you're just, maybe you run a company or you have your own company, solopreneur, whatever. And you want the people that work for you or work with you to be able to engage in controversial conversations, but you never have a way to practice. How do you expect, this isn't a rhetorical question. How do you expect people to get better at being comfortable with having controversial conversations if you don't have them? And by the way, that isn't everyone vehemently agreeing on one side of the controversy. That's not a controversial conversation. That's what we call preaching to the choir. So if your idea of having a controversial conversation is to sit around with people who agree with you on the controversy and discuss, is that a controversial conversation? Yes or no? I'm going to say hi from India. Raj Kumar, welcome. Barkley, it's hard to know to get better without trying. Exactly. How do you know if you get better if you're not even trying? So I think that's really great. I can't think of anything. I think of things that I give lip service to. I'm going to admit, sometimes I give lip service to things I want to get better at, but I really, since I'm not really trying or practicing, I'm probably just saying that I hope upon hope that I wake up in the morning and I'm better at, something. But if I really want to get better at something, it's not real. It's pretty disingenuous to say I really want to get better at something I'm never willing to practice. So if you really truly want to get better at or more comfortable with having controversial conversations, you have to practice. So where do you practice? If you can't practice at work, then your work environment suggests that they don't want you to be comfortable having controversial conversations, and that's okay. That's okay. If you don't want to practice at home, then you might not want that discourse. I don't want that at home. I don't want to have controversial conversations. Well, where do you practice? Where do you go to practice? And that's not just to debate, but to practice getting comfortable having controversial conversations. So Ray says, hey, Ray, you have to be able to accept that your performance will be poor in your first practices. Absolutely. And that's really hard with controversial conversations because you may feel like, I believe and know my side to be right. But if you can't argue it well, and to argue it well, you need to know both sides of the controversy. You need to know the strongest points of both sides of the controversy. Then it becomes very difficult. All right. So absolutely not. You need opposing views for controversy. Absolutely. Absolutely. So where do you go to practice? No, you can discuss controversial topics with other people, but you cannot make it fun sitting on the agreement with other people. Sometimes it's fun to agree. You're like all in agreement and you're in this fest and you're talking about the other side and you're like, yeah, they're this and they're that and they're this. And you feel like, wow, that was really energizing. Okay. So you can practice anywhere. You need a willing participant. Ooh, Michael has foreshadowed. That's so important. Rubber chickens. Good thinkers today. It is imperative that skills for managing controversial conversations be taught from very early in school. All right, here's my question. Do you think that safe spaces where people don't have to hear things that they don't like can still work with having controversial conversations? Do you go to college and university, and that might be where you learn to have controversial conversations. How can you have a controversial conversation about something you really care about and still feel safe? That's the point. How do you get comfortable if you've never practiced? All right. So we say you can practice by observing people's reasoning. How do you observe people's reasoning, Abdurrachid? How do you observe people's reasoning? Good foreshadow. Love it. All right. I think of a time that I discussed something controversial with someone that I disagreed with. And when you think about a time that you discuss something controversial with someone with whom you've disagreed, really take a second. As I'm rambling on about my answer to this, take a second to think about that. When was the last time that you discussed something controversial with someone that you really disagreed with? And, how did that leave you feeling? Energized, depressed, angry, frustrated, comfortable? The goal is comfort. The goal in today's conversation is to find a way toward comfort. Because when you are comfortable, then you can move forward toward the truth. And like we say at Good Thinking, truth is not a landing point. It's not like, yay, did the pommel horse and I landed on the truth. Truth is a journey. All right. So Michael says, my favorite expression, oh yeah, is that Stephen Covey? Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Love it. Love it, love it, love it. I think isn't that one of Stephen Covey's 7 habits for highly effective people? Love that. I'm going to share a story that comes to mind about a company that we were working with. By we, I say my company is Applied Curiosity Lab. And what we do specifically, in addition to creating LinkedIn learning courses on applied curiosity, teaching people and companies to become curious and then how to use that curiosity in an application, but also in critical thinking and decision making. So those are our lanes. So applied curiosity, critical thinking, decision making. And I say that to give a context for this story because a company that hired us wanted their entire leadership team to become more curious. And they wanted a culture where questions were valued and people could feel comfortable asking questions. And it seems like such a obvious and low hanging fruit, but it's not. It's a lot more complicated. And then they wanted to learn how to use curiosity, which is one of our lanes. All right. So the entire organization wanted to get better at asking questions. So how many of you know MVQs? MVQs, most valuable questions. So that's what we teach, is how to ask the most valuable questions. And there's a lot to it, whatever. But the company had moved along and a lot of their senior management had gotten really good at it. And then they wanted to move into the kind of the second lane that we do, which is critical thinking. And sometimes they start with critical thinking and go to applied curiosity and decision making. You can come at it from different lanes. But this company wanted to start with applied curiosity. We did that for one whole sequence. And then we went into critical thinking workshops. And they wanted to, so I explained that critical thinking requires knowing how to assess the quality of arguments, even controversial ones. And here's where the disagreement came in. So they did not want to bring up anything controversial at work. I threw out a lot of different options. We could talk about hiring practices. We could talk about gender, race, gun control in the United States, capital punishment. This company had a global workforce, so we had to pick things that weren't specifically United States centric. So we were trying to think of things that might have a broader appeal, racial, gender, whatever. Okay. Every single thing I brought up, too controversial. So I asked them, how are you going to practice assessing the quality of arguments? How do you think about assessing the quality of arguments? For example, if a whole group of people, this was a kind of an innovative pharmaceutical company, a whole group of people, team is working on something, and then the other team decides, that may not be quite right, but there were millions of dollars put into this endeavor. How are you going to bring this up if you don't have any practice with discussing controversial conversations? Because you want to practice before you have to apply it, right? So we really couldn't agree. I mean, in the end, they really said we are not comfortable having controversial conversations at work. So I ended up kind of doing something a little meta, which was, let's use the controversy of having controversial questions at work as our controversy. And that kind of worked. But pretty much everyone felt comfortable being on the side of, we don't want controversial conversations at work. And very few people, I don't recall if any, felt comfortable suggesting that we should have controversial conversations at work. But here's where something very interesting happened. And you have to tell me if you have seen this. In public, everyone agreed with the prevailing fashion of thinking we don't want controversial conversations at work in public. But the conversations I had, and it wasn't just at the senior level, but it was at all levels, the conversations that I had with individuals is that people wished that they could approach controversial conversations at work, but they felt that it was too unpopular to do so. So what you had was a disconnect between what people said in public and what people said in private. And here is the question. What kinds of things are very popular at work that people will say in public and maybe even, pretend to support or feel like they do support, but in the privacy of their own brains, in the privacy of their, when they can get outside and be allowed to think, they really start to question it. Or maybe they're questioning it, but they feel shut down. Do you feel that way about any topic? I'm going to bring up, okay, so Abdurrashid says, so with Stephen Covey. So yeah, we got Stephen Covey definitely first seek to understand, then to be understood. Okay, so Abdurrashid says concept, question, assumption, information, conclusion, perspective. Ha ha ha, ha ha ha, love it, love it, love it. All right, so to demonstrate intellectual integrity, and if you think intellectual integrity is important, that's good. If you think it's not important, that's good too, because intellectual integrity is often at odds with harmony. Wait, we want both. We want intellectual integrity and harmony. Well, here's how it looks. This company I was working with, they literally said, what we want is to create this culture of curiosity and intellectual integrity. And I said, well, intellectual integrity, do you agree that that means being able to assess the quality of arguments presented, regardless of whether you disagree or agree with the arguments? And they said, yes, we're on board. But when it came right down to it, they valued what? Intellectual integrity or harmony? Who wants to take a stab at what they valued? They valued harmony. And that can be a wonderful thing. It's nice to go to work with everyone who agrees. But if you have people that are seeing things, whether it's innovation, whether it's a different direction for the company, or even ideas that may be kind of getting out of fashion or being replaced by other things, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but they can't even discuss it because A, it's verboten, not allowed, or B, they're not comfortable, then you have chosen harmony over intellectual integrity. Is that okay? Sure. But the key is to be aware of it, not to fool yourself into suggesting that you value a culture of curiosity and intellectual integrity and innovation and forward thinking and future thinking. No, you value harmony, and harmony is beautiful, but it comes at a cost. Okay. So we've got, let's see, what do we have here? We've got a good link. This is related to the culture of nice, meaning the fear of disagreement or the culture of not speaking of controversial things. Ooh, okay. Thanks. I love that. Thanks, Ray. Put that Harvard Business Review. I'll definitely have to check that out. Jeffrey Webster, what are some methods to depersonalize the controversial issue and encourage? Okay, we're going to get into it. All right, let's get into it. Before we do, have you ever seen an old photo of yourself and like you kind of were embarrassed about the way you looked? Maybe your hair was some funky style. Maybe you had a mullet or you had, some kind of, you were embarrassed. Like, oh God, I can't believe I wore that. Oh my goodness. Yeesh. Have you ever looked at a photo of yourself and just thought, I can't believe that was me? Well, what about moral fashions? We know that fashions, they're visible. They're not invisible. We can see them from year to year to year. Now, like we might look now at, have people spending hundreds of dollars on jeans that are all torn up. And we might still think, hey, that looks cool. But maybe 10 years from now, we'll look back and think, we literally paid all that money to have ripped clothing. How could we have been? I mean, it's hard to see it now into the future. It's easy to see it from here into the past, right? These are fashions. But what about moral fashions? What's a moral fashion? Because moral fashions are potentially just as arbitrary. They're just invisible. And they're much more dangerous. Fashion, you can say, okay, that's good design, or that's bad design, or that was because of the trend of this, or that's because of societal things, whatever. Dressing oddly could get you laughed at. But violating moral fashions, what does it mean to violate a moral fashion? Like if something is fashionable, it's moral at work right now, and you can't discuss it. What is a moral fashion that you feel like, oh, I can't even discuss that, or I don't even want to think about that, because it could get you fired, ostracized, and in some countries, moral fashions can get you imprisoned or killed. So this is why having and being able to have where the stakes aren't death or imprisonment, it's very important to get comfortable with having controversial conversations, because a lot of these controversies involve moral fashion. So if you could travel back in time, or you could travel forward in time, what opinions or ideas or thoughts today could seem ridiculous? It seems to be a constant throughout history. So in every period, people believe things that were just as ridiculous and terrible, but they believed them so strongly that they would have gotten in trouble for stating otherwise. So April says, being woke is a moral fashion. Being woke is a moral fashion. It truly is a moral fashion. Absolutely. So let's take, I'm glad you brought that up. Let's borrow being woke. And the more specific you can put in there about being woke, I love that, is then we can take that apart. Now, whether I agree or disagree about being woke, you're trying to figure out, what is Becky? What is she about? Doesn't matter what I'm about. I'm just taking the idea and separating it from myself. Because we should be able to interrogate the idea of being woke from both the good perspectives and bad perspectives, the good parts and the bad parts, the good evidence and the bad evidence. Primarily, we should be able to do that regardless of who is bringing it up. If April brings it up or if I bring it up, who cares? We should be able to interrogate the idea, because no idea is above scrutiny and no person is beneath dignity. Okay. Say hi to Mumtaz. Where are you from, Mumtaz? Hi, welcome. I'm bringing you in. All right, so you got to be a part of the conversation. So is our time any different? To anyone who has read any amount of history, the answer is no. There is always, it would be a remarkable coincidence. It would be crazy to assume that ours was the first era to get everything right. That would be ridiculous to assume, and it would be sad. Because, we end here and this is what we know, and we're not going to move forward and interrogate any of these ideas. So it's fun to think that we believe things that people in the future will find ridiculous. I think it's fun. And so April brought up being woke. How much in the future, and being woke could be a concept that changes with the times, but let's just take being woke. Maybe there's something more specific that we can even use. What does it mean to be woke? We'll put that in and we'll use that as an example as we go through how to get comfortable. So if the answer is no, that you can't think of anything that could potentially be fashionably moral or even in fashion today, like you could say, Becky, can you believe in 2022 you wore those crazy glasses, with the tint? How dorky is that? Or your hair was so flat, or whatever. Can I perceive that in the future, I might think some of these fashions that I'm wearing are a little ridiculous? Can you do that with moral fashion? All right. So what does it look like to disagree without being disagreeable? Well, productive arguments require this because productive arguments serve two purposes: to open our minds to truths we couldn't see and to help others do the same. And here's how to avoid common pitfalls and argue like a master. All right. So we've got Hussein. The controversial topics are many and varied, but it is not normal to discuss everything, but to discuss a topic that suits your specialization. Last week, my colleagues and I were discussing a topic that we are all specialists except for one person whom we don't know. It seemed that his personality gave the impression that his only opinion is correct, thus ending the controversy and killing the pleasure of the, ooh, interesting. I love it. I'm so curious what the topic is. That can happen. Someone comes in, thanks, April, but April says she loves the glasses. But, you could see maybe in 5 years, she'd look back and go, oof, that was really dorky. Partly these tints are for my eyes. So there's like a medical reason for this, but, I kind of like them. But fashion is fashion, and moral fashions are no different. All right. So now we're going to get right into how we can be comfortable for the last 5 minutes of this, how we can be uncomfortable with controversial conversations. And we can use woke, we can use any kind of thing. So because what if everyone was comfortable with having controversial conversations at work? Would there be a downside or would there be an upside? Or would there be both? That's what we did at that company. We talked about what would happen if we were able to have controversial conversations at work. And you say, well, that's not the place for controversial conversations. But if you don't practice there, where do you practice? And if you are a manager or an executive or leading a charge and you want a culture of curiosity where ideas and questions can be valued, the questions are valued and appreciated regardless of whether they question the moral fashion of the day, then you have to be comfortable with having these conversations. So Abdurrahman said, can we say that in the future we would trade off our previous preference with thoughts that are adequate to our age and therefore disdain it? Good point. Good question. Meaning new preferences. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Okay. So April says both. Fantastic. All right, let's go. Let's get into it. First of all, I think a couple of you hinted at one of the things that is important to get comfortable with controversial conversations is you have to have agreement up front. And one of the ways that you can have agreement is to acknowledge that let's practice having controversial conversations. So if you're leading a team at work, sometimes that's why it is best, not to toot our own horn, but that's why it's best sometimes to have a company come in and help with this, because then it can be like, you can kind of, offload the responsibility of doing this. You're saying, I'm not bringing up this controversy, but we're going to practice having controversial conversations. So you want to have agreement up front. And if you're doing it with a friend because you want to practice, you could say, I'm practicing getting better at being comfortable with controversial conversations. Okay, that kind of sets the stage, right? Would you enjoy talking? Would you enjoy doing this with me? No, I don't really want to. Fine. That's not your partner. That's not, I want to get better at tennis. Do you want to play tennis? No. Well, then do you go play tennis with that person to get better? No. Same with controversial conversations. So find a good partner. If they say no, you don't have a condition in place any more than you have a tennis partner. But if they say yes, then you can move to step 2, which is mutually agreeing to shift your goal from persuasion mode to understanding mode. And this is borrowed from our new course, Critical Thinking for More Effective Communication on LinkedIn Learning. Check it out if you haven't checked it out. But you say, hey, I look forward to arguing and discussing this with you. Okay, now we've agreed that we're going to practice our controversial conversation, this tennis game. I really want to understand your position. You could even say, let's start with this topic. And you could even randomly draw a straw for picking one side of the conversation, one side of the controversy or the next. That's kind of fun. You could take woke, April's suggestion. And you could say, okay, what does it mean to be woke? And then you could take one side, and you could take the other. And if you both agree, then you could just assign it. But you still have some responsibility when you take the opposite side. You have some responsibility. All right, you say, I really want to listen to your position. Let's not start with persuasion. Let's kind of start with seeking to understand before being understood, right? So you say, I'll listen to you. I'll share my position with you, and we can get to persuasion later. Can we agree on this goal for both of us? And if they don't agree on the initial goal, then you don't have a tennis partner. You don't have a partner for practicing controversial conversations. You need to find out if you're both argument optimists or argument pessimists. We're going to go a few minutes longer so I can get through some of these and bring in your comments. So what is an argument optimist? An argument optimist believes that in any controversial conversation, if you look hard enough, you can find common ground. An argument pessimist assumes that there is no common ground. So among people who disagree about really important controversial topics, moral topics, things that are dear to your heart, beliefs, strong beliefs in identity. If someone who disagrees with me, I have no common ground. So if you are not both argument optimists, you probably don't have the condition in place to practice. That's not a good practice partner. Then you got to prepare your body language. So you got to show you're engaged and not just planning your response. Lean forward, make comfortable eye contact, maintain pleasant tone and nod to acknowledge. Even topics, even things that you might disagree with. Acknowledge. All right, bring in a few comments. Appropriation says you can watch videos about controversial conversations and assess arguments from the RRV perspective. Love it. Who knows RRV? RRV, reliable, relevant, and valid evidence. RRV is fantastic. If you want to know about RRV, check out Abdurrachid, check out our LinkedIn Learning course. I think that's in Developing a Critical Thinking Mindset, RRV. Maybe it's in the communication. We've got 3 critical thinking courses. We've got a new course coming out too, sometime in Q1. Very excited about that. I'll talk about that later. Because the first attempt might and someone might end up being offended or offending someone. But if you have this agreement that we're talking about up front, you're not going to have that, right? So Alan says, approach a controversial topic with curiosity. Yes! Asking questions with the intent of understanding someone's analysis of the facts and data and thinking process, and do so with genuine interest and without emotion. You could be excited. You could be curious. Brilliant. Love it. And Abdul says, when people are asking for good intentions, they are not asking for good changes. Excellent. The first skill people have to learn is how to listen. Right. And maybe the preparation for that is curiosity. A couple of other things that you want to do, we're going to go quickly because a lot to cover on this one. This is a big topic, is avoid moral judgment. Don't express outrage or imply a moral or cognitive deficiency. Avoid moral judgment. It can get in the way. Beware of false consensus bias. We had this in the company I work with because a lot of people thought everyone agreed that we should not discuss controversial topics, but in private, people didn't agree as much as people thought. So false consensus bias makes you think that people all agree with you for the same reasons because they're kind of nodding along. But when you get them separate, you really open up the opportunity for curiosity. You might find that not everyone agrees with you as much as they say they do, and that they are being complacent. And that's how you get a cult of personality. And it's not good for forward-thinking and future-thinking companies or even societies. Avoid binary thinking. Don't attack the weakest arguments. You have to know on a controversial topic, you have to know both sides, and you need to know the strongest, best arguments that the other side will make. You have to know them well. You can't just take the weakest argument because that's a fallacy. That's a weak man fallacy. Don't assume bad intentions. I know intentions are a big controversial thing right now, like do intentions matter? But to be comfortable with controversial conversations, you have to know that intentions do matter. And if you do assume bad intentions, you cannot move forward with your practice. Like if you assume that you don't need to do an overhand tennis serve, you're not going to get better at tennis. Okay. Remember that a good argument is deliberately constructed, and Abdurrachid kind of implied this, from a solid foundation. They're not made with funny comebacks or louder voices. You need to focus on presenting and understanding reliable, relevant, and valid evidence. A good argument requires supporting good evidence with strong supporting reasons. And here's the other thing about controversial conversations. You neither have to run from them or start in attack mode. Controversial conversations are not fight or flight situations. They are not. And I'll leave you with one thing. This great conversation, and let's continue the conversation after the live stream, and I'll try to get to your comments as much as possible. I want to leave you with this one thing, and that the opposite of fear is not bravery, and it's not courage. The opposite of fear of discomfort, fear of controversial conversations, fear of having your beliefs challenged. The opposite of fear is curiosity. So elevate curiosity ahead of criticism, judgment, fear, and complacency. And you have the first kind of mindset in place to be ready to get comfortable with controversial conversations. Thanks. Have a great week. Thanks for all your brilliant contributions. See you next week.